Hey Tim, in this lesson we'll be discussing Introduction to Microbes. So one of the first things you need to be aware of is what is microbiology. So microbiology is a specialized area within biology that deals with things that are too small to be seen without magnification. So things that are essentially too small to be seen with the naked eye. So they require magnification, typically through the use of a microscope, in order to make them visible. These organisms are typically called microorganisms or microbes, and there are different classes of microorganisms. This includes bacteria, archaea, protozoa, fungi, helminths, which are your parasitic worms, viruses, and algae. With microbes, they are essentially found everywhere, which is what I mean when I say they are ubiquitous. So pretty much any environment you could possibly imagine, there's some type of microorganism that has learned to adapt and survive in that type of environment. This includes soil, water, air, and even the human body. The petri dishes represented in this picture kind of show how ubiquitous microorganisms are. So within this plate, the petri dish has been exposed to the air, and bacteria and fungi from the air have been allowed to grow within the petri dish. So the growth that we're seeing in this petri dish represents all the different types of microorganisms that are present in the air. This top petri dish represents bacteria that are present in the soil. So soil was sprinkled into the petri dish, and then the petri dish was incubated, and bacteria and fungi that were found in the soil were able to grow within that plate. And then this represents bacteria found on the human body. So essentially what someone did is took a petri dish and put their tongue on the petri dish and then placed it in an incubator for growth. And then this showcases all the bacteria that was present on the human tongue, which there are billions of bacteria in our mouth alone. Most of them are actually beneficial, so this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Microbes are also very essential to life. They have critical factors in all different types of things. So the food and beverage production industries are very dependent on microorganisms. As we know, there are microorganisms present in certain types of food. For example, yogurt. If you look at the back ingredients of a yogurt, it will either tell you specifically what strains of bacteria are in the yogurt as probiotics, or it'll say just live cultures present. But there are many beneficial probiotic bacteria in certain types of foods. Microorganisms are also used in the alcohol industry, as yeast can go through fermentation, and a byproduct of that process is the production of alcohol. So a lot of breweries will hire microbiologists to work with the yeast in the fermentation process. Microorganisms are also very critical to us as humans. They are able to ward off infectious pathogens. So one term we'll use a lot in this course is normal biota, which are actually beneficial microorganisms. What they can do is actually protect us against bad pathogens or microorganisms that tend to cause disease. They can do this in a variety of ways. One way being taking up receptor points so that there's no way for the bad infectious pathogens to target us, or maybe creating a hostile environment in our body that's acidic so that bad microorganisms are not able to grow well. But good microorganisms can actually help protect us against pathogens or microorganisms that cause disease. Good microorganisms are present in our gastrointestinal system and can actually help with digestion of food. They can also produce vitamins for us. There's a strain of E. coli found in the large intestine that is able to produce vitamin K for us that helps with blood clotting. The normal biota help activate the immune system and keep it developed for us to protect us against infectious pathogens. And then also, good bacteria can produce chemicals that kill off other bacteria. We know these chemicals as antibiotics that are used to treat bacterial infections. So humans are quite dependent on microorganisms to actually protect themselves. There's also an industry of bioremediation. where microorganisms such as bacteria can be used to clean up toxic pollutants. So there are some bacteria and some fungi that are able to degrade toxic waste, and they can actually be used to clean up the environment, and that is called bioremediation. And then there's also a field of recombinant DNA technology where we can essentially combine genetic material from two different organisms. And how this is used in micro is they can actually take DNA from a human that has a code for how to build a specific protein and insert that DNA into a bacterial cell and manipulate bacteria into producing human proteins. This is actually how insulin is made nowadays. We simply just take the instruction set from a human cell for how to make insulin, and we insert it into a bacterial cell, and we can manipulate bacteria into producing insulin. So while they are very beneficial and most microorganisms are actually non-harmful, there are definitely some that are harmful. So pretty much in this course, when we talk about beneficial microorganisms, we're talking about the normal biota. But what's probably more interesting for you, especially if you're going into healthcare, is discussion about those that are considered pathogens. So pathogens are the microorganisms that are harmful and do have the ability to cause disease. There are thousands of different pathogens, and they cause billions of infections worldwide every year, making infectious diseases one of the leading cause of death worldwide. So we typically do tend to gear more towards pathogens in this course just because of the relevancy with healthcare, but I do want you to understand most microorganisms are actually not harmful. It's only a small percentage of them that are harmful, but they do cause a lot of infectious diseases that obviously can be concerning, so that's why we tend to focus on them. There are a lot of emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases, emerging being new strains that are coming about, re-emerging being strains that have been around for quite some time and are causing outbreaks again. So there's a lot of different things that we'll be talking throughout this course. We'll talk about infectious diseases like HIV, which can progress into AIDS, influenza, which is the flu. We'll talk about all different types of hepatitis, but hepatitis C is particularly interesting right now because there is an antiviral treatment program where that wasn't always the case. It used to be that hepatitis C was incurable. We'll talk about the Zika virus, which has been problematic in the U.S. in previous years. Tuberculosis, which worldwide is a problem and often prone to antibiotic resistance. And then, of course, we'll talk about COVID-19 as it was a recent pandemic. There are many infectious diseases that were once not believed to be infectious, meaning they were believed to be caused by genetics or some other environmental factor, and now we know that they're caused by a virus or a bacteria. One being gastric ulcers. Used to be that if someone had gastric ulcers, it was believed to be a result of diet and stress. So if you went to the doctor, they would tell you to change your diet, no more spicy foods, no more foods high in sugar, and regulate your stress. And inevitably, patients would get better for a short period, but they would relapse and have symptoms again. And then it was discovered what the true causative agent was, which is a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. So now when you go to the doctor for a gastric ulcer, they're still going to tell you to watch your stress and diet because that can exacerbate or worsen the situation, but they'll also give you a prescription for an antibiotic because a bacterial microorganism is the causative agent of that disease. There are some viruses and bacteria that can even cause cancer. So for example, hepatitis B and C have been linked to liver cancer. Helicobacter pylori has even been linked to stomach cancer. And there is a very small portion of type 1 diabetics that are infected with a virus called the Coxsackie virus, which is a virus that causes hand, foot, and mouth disease in babies, but this virus in some type 1 diabetics has actually infected their cells and prevented the production of insulin. It's certainly not present in every type 1 diabetic, so for many type 1 diabetics, their diabetes is a result of a genetic disease, and in type 2 diabetics, it's a result of diet, exercise, and environmental factors. But in a small subset of the population infected with the Coxsackie virus who exhibit diabetic symptoms, there is the potential that an antiviral treatment could be utilized to destroy this virus, and that might potentially cure the diabetes in those individuals. But again, that is a very small subset of the population. Most type 1 diabetics are not co-infected with this virus, so that would not be relevant in those cases. But in the small percent of the population who have type 1 diabetes and are also co-infected with this virus, it could potentially treat the condition. Another interesting infectious disease circulating around is highly pathogenic avian influenza, or H5N1. So this is essentially a very dangerous bird flu. It currently is circulating through Asia and is only transmitted through poultry. It is a very deadly pathogen, meaning that amongst the poultry that get infected with the virus in Asia, it has a 90% mortality rate. So it essentially causes severe pneumonia, and the birds die relatively quick. Why this is a concern is because influenza is known to mutate rapidly. And while it's only causing disease in the poultry population at the moment, there is the potential that it can mutate and target humans. And then if it maintained that same mortality rate, it would obviously be very concerning because it'd be a highly deadly pathogen. So what they've actually been doing is studying this virus in the ferret population. Ferrets have very similar respiratory receptors as we do. So if the virus was able to mutate to adapt to the ferret population, then we can make the assumption that it could potentially adapt to infect humans one day. And they have proven that this virus can mutate and it can target ferrets in the same way it targets poultry and maintain that same mortality rate, so that there is the potential one day in years to come that this may lead to a new pandemic. And with this virus having that high of a mortality rate, this would be very much a big concern. So in biology in general, cells are typically organized into two categories. We have eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells include animal cells, plant cells, and then fungi and protozoa. They're typically much larger in size, and they have all the standard membrane-bound organelles. So the nucleus and the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi apparatus, all the standard features that you've learned about in other biology courses, those are present in eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells, which are pretty much just bacteria, are much, much smaller in size, about 10 times smaller than eukaryotic cells. And their main thing is that they lack all membrane-bound organelles. So they don't have an endoplasmic reticulum or a nucleus or a Golgi apparatus. They're really just a cytoplasm, some genetic material, and some ribosomes. There's not a lot going on in there. So they're typically much less complex and they're much smaller. So collectively, eukaryotic cells are most cell types, including humans, animals, plants, fungi, protozoa. They're much larger and they have all the membrane-bound organelles. Whereas prokaryotic cells include bacteria. They're much smaller, much less complex, and do not contain any membrane-bound organelles.